The city of Greenville, deep in the American South, was sweltering under the oppressive heat of summer. Tensions simmered just as fiercely. The echoes of the Black Lives Matter protests had yet to fade, their voices still resonating after a series of racially charged incidents and cases of police brutality. Red spray-painted slogans, "I can't breathe," and "Justice for all," scarred the walls of old buildings like wounds refusing to heal. Meanwhile, the media and social networks relentlessly dissected every case tied to the movement. The city was split in two. One side demanded police reform and fought for justice, while the other defended law enforcement, condemning the protests as politicized hysteria. Greenville had become the epicenter of a nationwide debate. It had all begun on a cold, rainy night 3 months prior. Claire Johnson, a 35-year-old black woman working for a nonprofit organization supporting minority communities, had been arrested without a warrant. Officer Michael Turner accused her of drug possession in her car. Claire, however, adamantly declared her innocence. She remembered that night like a nightmare, crimson police lights flickering against her windshield, Michael Turner's sharp, commanding voice, and the sheer helplessness as rough hands dragged her from the car. She had spent 2 days behind bars before her lawyer proved the charges were entirely false. Turner had mistaken her vehicle for another of the same color, failing to verify the details before acting. Yet, what made this case even more significant was Michael's attitude. According to Claire's testimony, he had used racial slurs against her, even saying, "People like you always have something to hide." When the story spread across social media, it quickly became a symbol of the ongoing fight against racial injustice within the judicial system. Civil rights groups demanded severe consequences for Michael Turner, while police unions rallied behind him, insisting on his innocence and the preservation of law enforcement integrity. 3 months later, the courtroom doors of the Greenville County Courthouse swung open to an electrified atmosphere. Outside, a crowd had gathered, filling the streets with signs and chants. Some held banners reading, "Justice for Claire," while others raised placards declaring, "Support our police." The tension in the air was palpable, so much so that additional security patrols had been deployed to prevent violent clashes. Michael Turner walked into the courtroom with stiff, measured steps. His face was pale, his dark suit meticulously pressed, but the worry in his eyes was undeniable. His lawyer, Richard Hayes, a middle-aged man with years of courtroom experience, leaned in and murmured something urgent. Then the courtroom doors opened again, and every head turned toward the entrance. Michael felt his breath catch in his throat. The woman walking in was none other than Claire Johnson, the same woman he had falsely arrested, now standing as the presiding judge of his trial. Draped in a traditional judge's robe, crafted from African textiles sewn by her mother's hands, Claire stood under the chandelier's glow, her presence both regal and commanding. Michael swallowed hard, his throat suddenly dry. He had never expected this. It felt like a cruel twist of fate, placing him face to face with the person he had once wronged. Michael was a 42-year-old veteran police officer, once proud of his dedication to the force. But now he found himself in the most precarious situation of his career. His family, his wife and 2 young children, were buckling under the weight of public scrutiny. Michael knew that if he lost this trial, he would lose everything: his career, his reputation, and possibly even his family. Born and raised in Greenville's poorest neighborhoods, Claire had spent her childhood battling both poverty and racial prejudice. These struggles had forged her into a fierce, intelligent woman. Through sheer perseverance, she had risen to become one of the youngest judges in the county, a symbol of hope and progress in modern America. Yet she was no invulnerable heroine. She carried the scars of her past and wrestled with the delicate balance between her duty as an impartial judge and the personal pain inflicted upon her. The trial commenced. Claire sat at the judge's bench, her gaze cold but composed. She spoke with measured authority. "Today, this court will determine whether justice truly exists within our system. I expect all parties to respect the truth and uphold the law." Michael heard her voice, clear, firm, unwavering. Each word sliced through him, forcing him to confront the weight of his actions. This was his last chance to defend himself. But could the truth alone be enough to lift the shadow of prejudice and save him from the consequences of his past? The atmosphere in the courtroom grew increasingly suffocating. The chandelier's light cut through the shadows of prejudice like a blade, yet it also illuminated the stark contrast between the two central figures. Claire, the embodiment of justice and truth, and Michael, the accused, who had betrayed that very trust. Claire opened the trial with a voice that was calm yet razor-sharp. Ladies and gentlemen, this case is not just about one individual or a single wrongdoing. It reflects the deeper issues within our system, prejudices, societal pressures, and a lack of accountability. Michael's attorney, Richard Hayes, stood up to counter. Judge Johnson, my client is a dedicated officer. He acted according to protocol and based on the information available at the time. We will prove that this was an unfortunate mistake, not an act of racial discrimination. Claire nodded slightly, her expression unreadable. She knew this would be a long and arduous battle. As the lawyers engaged in heated arguments, Claire sat in the judge's seat, her eyes fixed on the case files before her. But inside, her emotions churned like a raging storm. She recalled that night, being dragged from her car, the cold rain seeping into her skin, her dignity crushed beneath Michael's contemptuous gaze. His words still haunted her. People like you are always involved in drugs. But now she was a judge. Her role was not to seek revenge or satisfy personal emotions, but to ensure that justice was served. She reminded herself, don't let prejudice obscure the truth. Listen to all sides. Yet, the biggest battle wasn't with Michael, it was with herself. She thought of her mother, the woman who had painstakingly sewn the African fabric of her judicial robe. Her mother had once told her, "My daughter, you were born to break barriers. Don't let anyone steal your dreams." Now, as she sat in that courtroom, Claire realized that her decisions would not only affect herself, but would also carry the hopes of millions of other people of color. Meanwhile, Michael Turner sat silently at the defendant's table, his hands clenched into fists, his eyes fixed on the floor. He struggled to maintain composure, but inside, a storm of emotions raged. He remembered that night. After receiving a report about a suspicious vehicle, he and his partner had rushed to the scene. Seeing a black car that matched the description, he had approached without hesitation. But when he saw Claire, a black woman behind the wheel, something inside him had instinctively switched to high alert. I was just following protocol, Michael told himself. But he couldn't deny that his demeanor had changed when he saw Claire. Years of working in law enforcement, where the pressure to protect fellow officers and uphold a rigid culture was unspoken yet omnipresent, had hardened him, making him more prone to biases than he had realized. Judge Johnson, my client acknowledges that there may have been an error in verification. However, that does not equate to racial discrimination. Please consider the circumstances he was operating under. Claire locked eyes with Michael. She didn't respond to the argument. Instead, she asked one simple yet piercing question. Mr. Turner, do you believe that if the victim had been white, you would have acted differently? The question struck Michael like an arrow to the heart. He couldn't answer immediately, because deep down, he knew the truth might reveal the worst parts of himself. After the first trial session, Claire left the courtroom, weighed down by the gravity of the case. Outside, Ethan Brooks, her white boyfriend and a fellow attorney, was waiting for her. Ethan approached, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. Are you okay? I know this trial isn't easy for you. Claire let out a deep sigh, her eyes staring into the distance. You know, sometimes I wonder if I'm strong enough for this. This isn't just a judge's duty. It's a battle against an entire system and its deep-seated prejudices. Ethan gave her a reassuring smile. You're the strongest person I know. But don't forget, you're not alone. I'm right here with you. They walked together along the quiet path to the parking lot. Ethan shared stories from his past, how his father, a former police officer, held deeply conservative views and had even engaged in discriminatory practices. Growing up with that knowledge had driven Ethan to pursue law, determined to correct the mistakes of the past. Claire listened, feeling both grateful and contemplative. She knew their relationship wasn't without its challenges. Their love was tested by societal barriers, and both had to constantly navigate the delicate balance between personal feelings and social responsibility. In a moment of reflection, Claire's mind drifted back to her childhood, growing up in the slums of Greenville, where opportunities for education and a better life seemed non-existent. Her mother, Ruth Johnson, was a resilient and resourceful woman. She would stay up late sewing and selling handmade goods to provide for her daughter. She had always told Claire, education is the key to freedom. You must learn to break free from this cycle. Claire recalled studying under the dim light of an oil lamp, running miles to the public library to borrow books, and lying awake at night, worrying about the future. But with unwavering determination and her mother's encouragement, she secured a scholarship to a prestigious university where she studied law and began her journey toward breaking barriers. Meanwhile, public opinion continued to boil over. The media sensationalized the case, turning it into a symbol of the fight against injustice in the legal system. A group of activists rallied outside the courthouse, chanting, "No justice, no peace." Meanwhile, others stood in support of Michael, arguing that he was merely a victim of political agendas and class warfare. Social media was equally divided. Some praised Claire as a hero, a courageous woman standing up against injustice. Others criticized her, claiming she was biased for presiding over a case in which she was personally involved. Claire read the online comments, feeling a mix of pain and pride. She knew she couldn't please everyone, but she remained steadfast in her belief. Justice is not something that is handed out. It must be demanded and defended. On the third day of the trial, the atmosphere in the courtroom had grown heavier than ever. Both sides had presented a series of evidence and witnesses, yet nothing seemed powerful enough to turn the tide. Michael's lawyer, Richard Hayes, argued that the incident was merely a professional oversight unrelated to racial bias. He insisted that Michael Turner had acted based on information from his colleagues and standard police procedures. However, Claire was not easily convinced. She demanded a thorough review of all records, including the original call recordings and surveillance footage from the scene. "Ladies and gentlemen," Claire spoke in a calm yet sharp tone, "we are here to seek the truth, not to assign blame, but to ensure that justice is served." That afternoon, an unexpected revelation changed the course of the case entirely. An anonymous source had sent the court a video from a security camera near the arrest site. As the footage played before the court, silence fell over the room. The video showed Michael Turner approaching Claire's car without conducting a thorough inspection. Worse still, he was heard speaking into his radio, using derogatory racial terms like dark and untrustworthy. Claire stared at the screen, her eyes burning with a mix of anger and pain. This was the evidence she needed to prove that Michael had acted on prejudice, not a mere mistake. Michael turned pale as he watched the video. He knew he had lost his last chance to justify himself. His lawyer, Richard Hayes, looked equally unsettled, struggling to salvage the situation. After the video was revealed, Claire decided to confront Michael directly. Rising from her seat, she stepped closer to the defendant's table and asked, "Mr. Turner, do you realize that your actions not only harmed an individual but also eroded public trust in the justice system?" Michael lowered his head, unable to meet Claire's gaze. His voice trembled as he spoke. I admit I was wrong. I let peer pressure and social biases influence my decision. But I never intended to harm Mrs. Johnson." Claire looked at him, her expression cold yet filled with emotion. "Intentional or not, your actions have caused serious consequences. Do you understand that every decision a police officer makes has the power to shape a person's life?" Michael had no response. He clenched his fists, his shoulders tense. Murmurs spread across the courtroom, some voices filled with outrage, others tinged with sympathy. As the trial neared its end, Michael was given a final opportunity to speak. He stood, his voice hoarse. "I want to apologize to Mrs. Johnson for what I've done. I can't change the past, but I hope she can find it in her heart to forgive me. I will take full responsibility for my actions and ensure that this never happens again." His apology did little to quell the public's anger. Many saw it as a belated attempt at redemption, not enough to undo the harm he had caused. Claire regarded him with a complex expression. She did not deny his remorse, yet she understood that an apology alone could not right all wrongs. Justice was not just about forgiveness, it was about accountability and action. The moment the trial concluded, the video spread like wildfire across social media. Millions watched, and many expressed outrage over Michael's actions. Human rights organizations hailed the footage as undeniable proof of systemic racism in law enforcement. They mobilized massive protests, demanding deep reforms in the justice system. Yet, some still defended Michael, arguing that he was a product of social pressures and police culture. The debate raged on, turning the case into a powerful symbol of the fight against injustice. After the trial, Claire met Ethan at a small cafe. She sat in deep thought, her eyes gazing into the distance. Ethan spoke softly. "How are you feeling? I know today wasn't easy for you." Claire sighed. "You know, sometimes I wonder if justice truly exists. Watching that video, it felt like everything we fought for was meaningless. Prejudice and injustice still persist, no matter how hard we try." Ethan reached for her hand. "You did the right thing. You didn't just fight for yourself, you fought for millions of others. Don't let disappointment break you." Claire offered a faint smile. "Thank you. I know I'm not alone. But sometimes I just wish things were simpler." They talked for a while longer, sharing thoughts on justice, love, and social responsibility. Ethan opened up about his struggles with his family's past, and Claire listened, feeling both gratitude and hope. Before leaving the cafe, Claire glanced down at her judge's robe. She remembered her mother's words, "You were born to break barriers." This robe is not just a symbol of power, it is our family's legacy. Clutching the fabric tightly, Claire felt a renewed sense of determination. The road ahead would not be easy, but she was ready to face every challenge in the pursuit of justice. On the final day of the trial, the courtroom was packed. The tension was palpable as all eyes turned to Claire Johnson, the one who would deliver the final judgment. Seated in the judge's chair, Claire's expression was calm yet resolute. Her voice rang clear and sharp as she spoke. "Ladies and gentlemen, after reviewing all the evidence and hearing from all involved parties, I have come to the conclusion that this case is not merely a matter of professional misconduct. It reflects deeper systemic issues within our judicial system: racial bias, peer pressure, and a lack of personal accountability." She paused briefly, her gaze locking onto Michael Turner. Mr. Michael Turner acted on prejudice and failed to conduct a proper assessment before making an arrest. His actions not only harmed Mrs. Claire Johnson but also eroded public trust in law enforcement. "I hereby declare that Mr. Michael Turner is guilty of racial discrimination and wrongful arrest." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Some people cheered in support while others reacted with disappointment. Michael's head dropped, his face pale. He knew this outcome had been inevitable. Claire continued, her tone unwavering. "However, justice is not solely about punishment. It is also about learning and redemption. I order Mr. Michael Turner to participate in a rehabilitation and racial sensitivity education program. This is not leniency. This is an opportunity for him to prove that he can change." After delivering the verdict, Claire rose from her seat and walked to the podium. She looked out at the courtroom where hundreds of eyes were fixed upon her. Her voice was warm yet commanding. "Justice is not something that is given, it must be demanded, defended, and sometimes forgiven. But forgiveness does not mean forgetting. Instead, we must learn from the past to build a better future." Her words echoed through the chamber, leaving many in deep contemplation. Some nodded in agreement while others wiped away tears. Michael lifted his gaze toward Claire, his expression filled with regret. He knew he could not change the past, but he hoped he could make amends for the future. After the trial, Claire and Ethan met at a small cafe by the river. They sat in quiet companionship, watching the gentle flow of the water. Ethan took Claire's hand, his voice soft. "How do you feel? I know today was a long one for you." Claire offered a faint smile. "You know, I feel relieved. Not because I won, but because I did what was right. I fought not just for myself, but for everyone who has ever been hurt by injustice." Ethan gazed at her, admiration in his eyes. "You're the strongest woman I know. But don't forget that even the strongest need rest. Fighting for justice is a lifelong journey, and you can't do it alone." Claire nodded, gratitude filling her heart. She knew that her relationship with Ethan was far from simple, but his love and understanding had helped her endure the most difficult challenges. One early morning, Claire stepped out of her house wearing the traditional judge's robe sewn by her mother from African fabric. The golden light of dawn illuminated her face, highlighting both her resilience and her grace. She walked the familiar path leading to the courthouse, ready to continue her mission. The road ahead would be difficult, but she was undeterred. Each step she took was a reminder that justice was not just a destination, it was a journey. As she walked, she thought of her mother, the woman who had taught her, education is the key to freedom. You must learn to break the cycle. Claire smiled, hope swelling in her chest. She knew she was not alone. Beside her were Ethan, her friends, and millions of others fighting for a fairer society. In the final scene, Claire's silhouette against the morning sun became a symbol of strength and hope. Her traditional robe was not just a family heirloom. It was a testament to the perseverance of a Black woman rising in modern American society. Meanwhile, across the street, Michael Turner quietly left the courthouse. Burdened by regret and failure, he still clung to the hope of change. He knew the road to redemption would not be easy, but he was willing to take the first step. The light of justice had shone upon the darkest corners, but more importantly, it had ignited a spark of hope in every heart. After the trial, Claire and Ethan's relationship deepened. Together, they faced not only personal challenges but also societal ones, proving that their love was more than just emotion, it was a commitment to a better future. One evening, they sat together in Claire's small apartment, where the warm glow of the lamp created an intimate atmosphere. On the table, a vintage jazz record played, its soothing melody drifting from an old turntable. Ethan looked at Claire, his voice low and contemplative. "You know, I've always admired how you fight for justice. But sometimes I wonder if I'm strong enough to stand beside you." Claire smiled, placing her hand over his. "You don't have to be perfect. You just have to be here for me in the hardest moments. That's what makes me trust you." They spoke of the past, of wounds yet to heal, and of dreams still unfulfilled. Ethan shared stories of his father, a veteran police officer who had once taken part in acts of racial discrimination. His voice carried both pain and resolve. "I grew up haunted by my father's legacy. He taught me that the law is a tool to maintain order, but in reality he used it to uphold injustice. I chose this path not for prestige, but to right the wrongs of the past." Claire listened, her heart swelling with gratitude. She realized that their relationship was not just about love, it was a bridge between two different worlds. By the end of the night, they danced to the rhythm of the jazz record, letting the music ease their burdens. In that moment, they were free from society's pressures, only their hearts remained in sync. Michael Turner's trial was not just an individual case, it became a symbol of the broader struggle against injustice in modern America. On social media, human rights activists continued to push for police reform. Slogans like "No justice, no peace," and "Justice for all" spread across the internet. Many saw Claire Johnson as a beacon of Black feminism, a woman who dared to challenge a broken system. However, there were also voices of opposition. Some defended Michael, arguing that he was a victim of politicization and class resentment. The heated debate mirrored the deep divisions within American society, where racial injustice and police reform remained some of the most contentious issues. Claire understood that while a verdict had been delivered, true justice could only be achieved when the entire system changed. She took part in community discussions, sharing her story and encouraging collective action for a more equitable future. In moments of respite, Claire often turned to jazz music, an integral part of Southern culture. She loved listening to classics by Louis Armstrong and Billie Holiday, artists who had used music to express both the pain and hope of the Black community. Her judicial robe, sewn from traditional African fabric, was another powerful cultural symbol. It was not just a relic from her mother, it was a testament to the connection between past and present. Every time Claire put it on, she felt the strength of her ancestors guiding her forward. In the end, the story closed with the image of Claire walking under the morning sun, her traditional robe billowing behind her. She was more than just a judge, she was a symbol of resilience and hope. At a distant street corner, Michael Turner quietly left the courthouse. Though burdened by regret and failure, he carried with him the hope of redemption. He knew that the path to healing would not be easy, but he was ready to take the first step. The final message of the story resonated through Claire's words. Justice is not something bestowed. It must be demanded, protected, and sometimes forgiven. The light of justice had shone into every hidden corner, but more importantly, it had ignited the flame of hope in each heart.